We've talked about Transformers Generation 2 a few times on this channel. We've talked about its multiple follies, its few successes, and its massive innovations. However, we've never actually focused on an actual factual vintage Generation 2 figure. G2 Beachcomber made a cameo in our Beachcomber Focus video, and we have discussed the Generation 2 inspired repaints with the TFCC G2 Starscream. But we're going to go straight to the source, straight to the neon, and we're going to talk about 1992's Generation 2 Starscream. Why Starscream again? Because I'm biased and I like Starscream. There's no getting around that. Generation 2 began life as essentially an adrenaline shot to the dying Transformers franchise. While it was still going strong in Europe, it really tapered off in North America. So Hasbro dusted off some old molds as well as some fan favorite characters and ran them through a bodacious 90s color filter to bring us Generation 2. Now Generation 2 would see a lot more original molds, however, this is how it started. G1 figures slightly tweaked with new colors. As mentioned before with the Transformers Collectors Club version of Starscream, Generation 2 is no longer the red, white, and gray of G1. Instead, it's slate gray, stark white, and salmon pink. This salmon pink color is really difficult to pick up on camera, and in some lighting, it looks orange, which I think is why the Transformers Collectors Club version of G2 Starscream is cold creamsicle orange. But the color scheme is not the only thing changed on G2 Starscream. When comparing him to the original Seeker mold, we can see that the thin null rays have been replaced with big-ass missile launchers for extra 90s action. This isn't as out of place as you'd think. This is the year 1992, and Hasbro is knee-deep in Battle Core G.I. Joe, which all have big, bodacious missile launchers. In fact, the missiles on Generation 2 Starscream, while not the same, are very similar to the 1992 Flak Viper. And when sat with their 90s G.I. Joe counterparts, Generation 2 Transformers do have an internal logic to them. They're bold, they're brash, they're neon, they're eye-catching, and they even had a crossover in the Marvel Comics, with Generation 2 Megatron's tank reformatting being part of Cobra Commander's machinations. If you've ever handled the G1 Seeker mold or any of its many reissues, then you know what you're getting here. It's a little stiff, it's a little awkward, and it doesn't have very much articulation, but it has an impressive silhouette, and it looks pretty cool. It has that classic real robot aesthetic of the time. It does have some parts forming, which irks some people, but has never really bothered me. And you know, if you're feeling frisky, you can do the G2 commercial mistransformation, where he has wings on his shoulders. It looks okay and it's kind of fun, but it's more cumbersome than anything else. Now, moving into vehicle mode, this toy is really starting to show its age. Not in regards to my perspective as somebody collecting a vintage figure, but how outdated it was at the time. The Diaclone jet mold requires a lot of parts forming, and it feels incredibly antiquated when you compare it to both later Generation 2 figures and later G1 figures like the Headmasters, Target Masters, Power Masters, etc. The alternate mode has the cloud camouflage, much like a real F-15 Eagle, and it does have tactical air command on it, which is an outdated term by this point. We've discussed these things in the TFCC G2 Starscream review. But something you may have noticed when comparing it to the TFCC Starscream, the original Generation 2 version does not have the hyper-stylized Decepticon logo. The original Generation 2 figures were pretty much just using what they had, and what they had were still the original G1 sticker sheets, which includes the original Decepticon logos. Most of the time on these transitional G1 to G2 repaint figures, you don't see the stylized logos. Instead, they're relegated to these tampograph tramp stamps, and in Starscream's case, his is on his leg. Outside of the changing deco and the missile launchers, the other major addition to G2 Starscream is this little guy. For whatever reason, Hasbro decided that the G2 jets need a little extra oomph, a little extra zhuzh, so they gave them these sound boxes in the shape of double-barreled tanks. They just have basic machine gun and swooshing sounds, and Starscream's is neon orange, while Ramjet's was a much more subdued purple. And they even changed the tooling so that the tanks can snug onto the backs of the jet. It looks pretty goofy if you ask me, but I kinda like it. And G2 by itself in a vacuum is pretty goofy and it's endearing to me. It has a lot of interesting ideas and concepts, most of which don't land, but there's a little bit of moxie behind them. However, toys do not exist in a vacuum, even Transformers. They are influenced by their surroundings and their competition. And what are they competing with, if not the bright, eye-catching comic characters that we see on toy store shelves, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Toy Biz X-Men. Alright, so in pop culture, there are watershed moments. These moments not only change the landscape of their medium, but will forever change public opinion and the public perception of these topics. For example, in movies, Star Wars forever changed science fiction and summer blockbusters. In comic books, Frank Miller's The Dark Knight forever changed our perception of Batman, going from the fun and campy Adam West version to the grim and gritty version that we can never escape now. Moving into the 90s, another great example is Nirvana. They might not have been the first grunge band, they might not have even been the best grunge band, but the meteor called Smells Like Teen Spirit arrived in 1991, and by 1992 all the hair metal dinosaurs were dead, and we had an entirely new music landscape. And of course, toys are no different. In 1964, we had G.I. Joe. In 1978, Kenner gave us... And then in 1988, Playmates Toys came out with the... It can't be understated how much TMNT changed the toy landscape. They changed the standard of action figures for the next decade. TMNT dominated the toy shelves of the late 80s and early 90s, with squatty, brightly colored, kind of gross, but fun action figures. They were just edgy enough to be counterculture, but just safe enough to let your parents buy it. It was the perfect mix, and Hasbro was dusting off some of its oldest G1 figures for this burgeoning market. As innovative as the Diaclone jet mold was back in 1982, it's positively geriatric by 1992. While we as Transformers fans might appreciate the intricacies and details of the original Diaclone molds, highlighted by crazy G2 color schemes, in the context of the time and their competition, they are both outdated and awkwardly out of place. It'd be like having the Bay City Rollers open for Rammstein. I feel like if there was any older molds that actually could have competed well against Playmates offerings like TMNT, Bucky O'Hare, or Toxic Crusaders, it would have been the Decepticon Headmasters. They're already big, chunky, bright, and colorful characters, and they have that kind of 90s animalistic undertones that would have performed pretty well. The issue is, they had just come out 4 years earlier, and it would have looked pretty desperate on Hasbro's part. Not like this doesn't already look desperate. Unfortunately, G2 Starscream really is awkward and out of place in the context of its time. And even compared to some of the other G2 decos, it's not as brash as you'd expect. It's very subdued and it's very cold, and I almost wonder if it's partially inspired by the fact that he is a ghost at the very end of Generation 1. But outside of that, it's very, very minimalistic. It almost feels like a holdover. Like it's a rough draft, like it's the first idea of a Generation 2 Starscream. And really, that's kind of the entirety of early G2. It's all holdovers and flash-in-the-pan ideas and just trying to get back into the saddle. But ultimately, these attempts would fail. G2 is seen as a failure overall in the grand scheme of Transformers. Despite the fact that there was a lot of engineering development near the end, it is still very much remembered for these geriatric old toys getting dusted off and flashed with bright neon colors. And that really did handicap the toy line. Pretty much it took Generation 2 bombing on the toy market for Hasbro to realize that they needed to rework Transformers from the ground up, using some of the innovations that we saw at the very tail end with the Cyberjets and laser rods and working that into Beast Wars. Now, 30 years later, there are still people that malign Beast Wars because of its aesthetics, as well as the mainframe cartoon. However, no matter your opinion, what can't be denied is the fact that it proved that Transformers could survive in the modern age, and it proved that innovation was the key, not just regurgitating the same characters with new decos. As stated before, I am very biased. I like Starscream. He is my favorite Decepticon and probably my overall favorite Transformers character. And I honestly really do like this color scheme. That still holds true from the Transformers Collectors Club version. However, it can't be denied that G2 Starscream is an oddity in the grand scheme of toys. He is this very interesting transitional point from Generation 1 to G2, and from G2 to Beast Wars. The figure is simultaneously modern and outdated. It's progressive and regressive. It is stagnant, yet bold. All of these things are true, and Starscream is probably one of the best characters to embody all of these ideas. G2 Starscream is a very interesting figure in my opinion, as it is a transitional piece. It is a stepping stone into the greater world of Transformers, and it's a very interesting building block at the base of modern Transformer engineering. It is both everything that works in Transformers and everything that can hold it back, all at the same time.